49 people were killed and 48 are being treated in hospital after at least one gunman launched a terrorist attack on 2 mosques in the New Zealand city of Christchurch. The country's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has described the shootings as one of New Zealand's darkest days. It is the worst mass shooting in the country's history, with almost 4 times the death toll from the last large-scale attack in 1990. 3 men and a woman were in custody, while a car was found with 2 IEDS, improvised explosive devices, which had been neutralized. Police Commissioner Mike Bush said a man in his late 20s had been charged with murder and will appear in court on Saturday. The 3 others were arrested on firearms offenses, but their link to the atrocity is still being investigated. Who was the terrorist shooter? One of the men in custody was confirmed to be an Australian living in New Zealand. Australian media identified him as Brenton Tarrant, originally from New South Wales. He reportedly posted images of weapons and ammunition on Twitter before the attack, along with a 74-page manifesto in which he described himself as an ordinary white man, 28 years old, born in Australia to a working-class, low-income family. He shot a 16-minute body cam video on Friday as he drove to Al-Noor Mosque on the city's Deans Avenue. A still image taken from video circulated on social media, apparently taken by a gunman and posted online live as the attack unfolded. Reuters. The horror of the attack was compounded by the fact that part of it was broadcast live, and the footage shared through social media platforms. New Zealand police alerted Facebook to the suspect's live video broadcast shortly after it began, and the company quickly took it down, said Facebook Public Policy Manager Sharik Zafar. The mosque at Al-Noor in central Christchurch was filled with worshippers when it was attacked happened, as was a second mosque in Linwood. Bangladesh cricket team arrived at the Al-Noor Mosque as it was being attacked, but none of the players were injured. Witnesses recounted seeing bloodied bodies, and tales have emerged of incredible acts of heroism by members of the public who rushed to help the wounded. 7 people were killed at the Linwood Mosque, 3 outside the mosque itself, and 41 were killed at the Al-Noor Mosque. 1 person died in hospital, and 48 more were there being treated for gunshot wounds. Witnesses tell of blood-stained clothes, bodies and ambulance after ambulance. Christchurch journalist Thomas Mead was at the Al-Noor Mosque about 10 minutes after hearing about the shooting. It was pandemonium, he told The National. The police were hiding behind civilian cars, pointing rifles down the street. They were screaming at people to get down. Then there was just ambulance, after ambulance, after ambulance. Mr. Mead said he spoke to a number of people who had been inside the mosque at the time. I spoke to a man who had blood on his clothes. He was inside when the shooting happened. He said the guy went from room to room, just shooting. Another witness told stuff.co.nz he was praying at the Al-Noor Mosque when he heard shooting and saw his wife lying dead on the footpath outside when he fled. Grieving members of the public sit on a curb following the massacre. EPA. Another man said he saw children being shot. There were bodies all over me, he said. As the shooting was unfolding, hundreds of schoolchildren were out in central Christchurch protesting against climate change, as part of an organized rally across the city. Christchurch resident James Dan was in the central city alongside protesters when police told them to dissipate. No one really knew what was going on, not even the police really. We had no idea how serious it was. We knew the schools were on lockdown. I made my way home down Colombo Street through crawling traffic. As I got to Brome Street, I could see to my right that there was more police activity. I found out later it was the Subaru that the police had rammed off the road, which was carrying a car bomb. The victims ranged from young children to adults. Canterbury District Health Board Chief Executive David Meath said 48 patients, ranging from young children to adults, were being treated at Christchurch Hospital. Injuries ranged from critical to minor. Further patients had gone to other health facilities across the city. 12 operating theaters are currently in use, and due to the nature of some of the injuries, many people will need multiple surgeries, he said. Armed police had initially placed a cordon around the hospital, as more than 200 family members flocked to check on the condition of injured relatives. Unconfirmed reports state a 4-year-old child was in a critical condition, and that among the dead was a married couple in their 50s who were active mosque helpers. The incident had rocked the country, and the international community. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, "We utterly reject and condemn you," Jacinda Ardern said. People arrested had exhibited extremist views, and it is clear that this can now only be described as a terrorist attack. Getty Images. Ms. Ardern took aim at the shooters in a moving statement on Friday, saying, "You may have chosen us, but we utterly reject and condemn you." Christchurch was the home of these victims. For many, this may not have been the place they were born. In fact, for many, New Zealand was their choice, a place they actively came to and committed themselves to. The place they were raising their families, the place where they were part of communities they loved and who loved them, she said. "We were not a target because we are a safe harbor for those who hate. We were not chosen for this act of violence because we condone racism, because we are an enclave for extremism. We were chosen for the very fact that we are none of these things. Because we represent diversity, kindness, compassion, a home for those who share our values, refuge for those who need it. And those values, I can assure you, will not and cannot be shaken by this attack." New Zealand's national security threat had been raised from low to high. Ms. Ardern said the suspects had not been on terrorism watch lists. "It is clear that this is one of New Zealand's darkest days," she said. "Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence." Christchurch had welcomed thousands of immigrants after the earthquakes of 2011, as many moved to the city to aid in the rebuild. New Zealand's previous deadliest mass murder occurred in Aramoana, a small seaside township also on the South Island, northeast of Dunedin town, on November 13, 1990. Aramoana resident David Gray killed 13 people, including a police officer, after a disagreement with his neighbor. The attack led to sweeping changes to New Zealand's firearms legislation, leading to the country's now incredibly strict gun laws. These include 10-year photographic licenses and tight restrictions on semi-automatic guns. However, anyone over 16 can apply for a standard firearms license, after doing a safety course, which allows them to purchase and use a shotgun unsupervised. According to police figures released in 2018, the country's murder rate was at a 40-year low. A report, published by Stuff, showed that there were 35 murders in 2017 in the country, over the whole 12 months. The mosque terror attack surpassed that total in one day in 2019. "I fear for the mental health of this city. This is going to be another long haul once the enormity of what has happened sinks in." Christchurch City Councillor Raf Manji told The National this was a terrible tragedy and an appalling act, and a dark day for our city. "It's been a tough day, reminiscent of February 22, the Christchurch earthquake. I fear for the mental health of this city. Kids locked down in school afternoon. This is going to be another long haul once the enormity of what has happened sinks in." Mr. Manji said the lockdown for all buildings, schools and offices finished at about 6 p.m. Councillors would be back in their offices on Saturday for briefings and updates on the situation. Councillor Yanni Johansson, who had been working on a multicultural strategy for the city and represents the Linwood ward where one of the targeted mosques was located, saw armed police while driving to the Central City Council buildings, where around 100 students were protesting against climate change. "I came in and thought, oh my god, they're just sitting targets," he told The National. The students were then ushered upstairs into council chambers and in lockdown for 4 hours. He said it was extremely traumatizing for the city, as Christchurch had only just been allowed to accept refugees again after the 2011 earthquakes that killed 185. The earthquakes were awful and they were horrible, but they were Mother Nature. But to have such a deliberate act against you as a community, and to have that targeted at a specific group, it's just horrific. New Zealand fundamentally is a good place. But it's going to change the way we do stuff. He went on to say Christchurch was such a small place, and people would need to rally to help those who had lost someone in an attack that was just heartbreaking. Tomorrow is going to be incredibly difficult. I'm going to know people who have lost family members or have been killed themselves, he said. UAE leaders send condolences. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, Vice President of the UAE and ruler of Dubai, and Anwar Gargash, UAE Minister of State of Foreign Affairs, condemned the attacks in tweets. Sheikh Mohammed said, "We have witnessed the most heinous crime of religious hatred. Our condolences to New Zealand, and to the families of the victims." Farther afield, precautions were being taken around mosques after the attacks. British police stepped up patrols around mosques and said they were speaking with community leaders. "We are monitoring events in New Zealand closely and send our condolences to all those affected," said Neil Bosu, the UK's head of counter-terrorism. "Our international network of UK counter-terrorism officers will be ready to support our counterparts in New Zealand." Similar measures were being taken in France. Donald Trump, Queen Elizabeth and Pope Francis condemn attacks. World leaders were quick to pay their respects while condemning the shooting. Donald Trump, the U.S. president, expressed his warmest sympathy, and said the United States stands by New Zealand. Pope Francis sent a telegram to Catholic cardinal in New Zealand saying he was deeply saddened. Imran Khan, Pakistan's Prime Minister, expressed his condolences and said he was alarmed by the further rise of Islamophobia. "This reaffirms what we have always maintained, that terrorism does not have a religion. Prayers go to the victims and their families." Britain's Queen Elizabeth II, who is New Zealand's head of state, said she was deeply saddened by the appalling events in Christchurch today. Updated March 15, 2019, 5:50 p.m.